there'll be about 12 communities representing about 20 or 21 boiled water advisories.
Tonight, the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte and the federal government start work to end some boil water advisories.
Well, nursing home closes down. That would displace all those residents that are there.
And country music star Crystal Shawanda starts a campaign to help a First Nations nursing home. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Today, Canada announced funding to end 5 boil water advisories for the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. With nearly 60 boil water advisories remaining, the Liberals will not fulfill their 2015 election promise. Minister Mark Miller spoke with APTN's Tom Fenario about what progress he expects to see in 2021.
It's something most Canadians take for granted. Drinkable water right out of the tap, without having to boil it. Soon the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte will know what it feels like.
The announcement that we made public today was the result of was a lot of the work with the community and ensuring that they had the funds necessary.
In this case, $18.2 million will be spent to end 5 long-term drinking water advisories in the territory, which includes the over 2,000 people in Tyendinaga. Work is set to begin next week, which begs the question, when can other First Nations expect to have clean water to drink? Miller's optimistic that the dozens of boil water advisories still in place will soon be whittled down.
The reasonable foresight that we see in terms of lifting by, let's say, spring of 2021 is that there'll be about 12 communities representing about 20 or 21 boiled water advisories that will still have some work to do in the long term.
For the long-term advisories that will remain past the spring, Miller intends to provide transparency.
I hope to be able to put something together so that Canadians can take a look at it and say, okay, well, this community has these needs. This is the status of their project. Obviously, if the community is willing to share that, because not all communities want to be public, and we have to respect that, obviously. But I think Canadians want to know what the timeline is with respect to those remaining communities.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
The federal government introduced legislation they say will align Canadian law with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP for short. The UN passed its UNDRIP resolution in 2007, but Canada has been slow to follow through until now. There's widespread support for the proposed legislation from Indigenous political groups, but according to Russ, there are a number of reasons Indigenous people should be on guard. Russ, thanks for joining us. UNDRIP is said to recognize, among other things, language and self-determination rights of Indigenous people, but does it? Does it recognize the title Indigenous people have over their land?
Well, yes, the most important article in the UN Declaration is the right of self-determination. That right is tied to other articles in the UN Declaration that relate to lands, territories, and resources, and to free, prior, and informed consent being required when there's resource development activities on Indigenous lands. So it does have articles recognizing self-determination and land rights.
And here in Canada, Justin Trudeau is moving to, quote, align Canadian law with the Declaration within 3 years. What's so bad about that?
Well, he's not doing that. What he's doing is he's passing Bill C-15, a law called the United Nations Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. It doesn't say, adopting the UN Declaration or approving the UN Declaration. So it's right in the title that all they're doing is passing a law which is going to basically develop an action plan, which they put off for 3 years. It's not really implementing the UN Declaration. Plus, they're trying to take the UN Declaration and put it in under Section 35 of Canada's Constitution. So in other words, rather than respecting international law, they're domesticating, a Canadian definition of the UN Declaration and trying to basically interpret it through the status quo policies and laws that they're implementing now. So there's not really a change if this law passes, and that's the problem, is the things we want to see change are being kept from us.
So, Russ, what do you think should happen then?
I think the bill should be withdrawn They only had a 6-week engagement process, and I think they need to go back to the drawing board and talk to our people, because doing this during a pandemic isn't right. It's an unfair process, and these matters are just too important for the future of our peoples, to put into a short legislative process in Parliament. We need to really discuss these things and then talk about what's the proper framing, if there's going to be legislation, of what it should look like.
And the Liberals and the NDP love this legislation, and the Conservatives hate it because they say it will let the original people veto natural resource exploitation. What are you hearing from the average Indigenous person about it?
Well, they support the right of self-determination. They support free, pro-informed consent. They don't agree with the Conservatives. And the Conservatives, are focused on that, but really they're not talking about the concerns that Indigenous peoples have about Article 46, which talks about, state sovereignty and territorial integrity, that the UN Declaration can't be interpreted to affect those things. And that's what the grassroots are really worried about, is Canadian sovereignty trumping Indigenous sovereignty.
All right, that's definitely a lot to think about, Russ. That's Russ Diabo joining us from Ontario.
Thank you.
We want to hear what you think about Bill C-15, Canada's proposed UNDRIP legislation. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and now TikTok. Premier Brian Pallister wants Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to stop a holiday visitation plan on Peguis First Nation. The community is allowing extended family gatherings between December 23rd to the 28th and December 31st to January 1st. Pallister has written a letter to the Prime Minister urging him to step up and make what he calls a correction. CTV's Jeff Keele has more.
A Manitoba First Nation allowing visits over Christmas may have the backing of the federal government, against the wishes of the Premier, putting pandemic politics on full display.
I really don't care what the Premier has to say.
This is well-meaning but mistaken.
Provincial public health orders restrict gatherings to household members only until at least January the 8th. Peguis First Nation says unlike other communities in Manitoba, it has low COVID-19 case numbers because of its own rigid lockdown. So it's allowing extended family and students to visit over the holidays.
We feel we're doing it safely, and we have every right as First Nations to do this. I know we're on federal land.
Premier Brian Pallister is critical of the plan, saying the community should follow provincial public health orders.
We're going to have two sets of rules around who gets to have Christmas and how it's celebrated this year, because we're all doing our part to protect one another. We're all in this together.
Peguis Chief Glenn Hudson says he spoke with Federal Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller, who was in favor of the visitation measures. The Premier says he has sent a letter to the Prime Minister calling on him to correct what Pallister calls a mistake.
I'm deeply disappointed that the federal minister, Minister Miller, would come out and say that's fine with him. It is not fine. It is wrong.
Chief Hudson says Peguis locked down earlier than the rest of the province, brought case numbers close to zero, so it can offer this gift to community members.
All Manitobans could have enjoyed it too if he locked down early. But I guess the economy is more important to him than people's lives.
Two Alberta men made their first court appearance today at the St. Paul Court over their role in the death of 16-year-old Xander Jackson of Goodfish Lake First Nation. 30-year-old Sean Steinauer and 32-year-old Ryan Cardinal have both been charged with second-degree murder in the death of Jackson, whose body was found October 2nd. Jackson's family and supporters held a vigil outside the courthouse to remember Jackson and ask for justice. We have to take a short break, but still to come. We'll speak with DFO Minister Bernadette Jordan about fish farms around the Discovery Islands in BC. Welcome back. The federal government has made its long-awaited decision on whether to renew fish farm licenses around the Discovery Islands in BC. Fish farms around the Discovery Islands, shown here in BC, the coast from Vancouver, have been a contentious business for years. Some scientists say parasites from these farms are killing wild salmon stocks, but proponents of the farm point out that it's a billion-dollar business employing hundreds of people. So will Canada renew the licenses of these farms? The answer is no. Department of Fisheries and Oceans Minister Bernadette Jordan released her decision this afternoon, and she joins us now by Skype. Minister Jordan, thank you for joining me. Why did you decide that fish farms should close around the Discovery Islands in BC?
So one of the things we heard was that First Nations in the Discovery Islands, the 7 First Nations there, really wanted to have a say in the decision. So we spent the last few months doing consultations with those First Nations, and we heard overwhelmingly that they wanted to have those fish farms removed from the area. So that is the decision we're making today, that there will be phasing out of those fish farms with no intent to renew licenses in the future.
So how many farms are we talking about exactly?
So currently there's 19 sites in the Discovery Islands. 9 of those sites are fallow. There's no fish in them, and 10 of them have almost 3 million fish altogether in those areas. But what the decision is today is that there will be no new fish added into those sites. The fish that are in there are going to be allowed to grow out to a certain size where they can be harvested, and then no new fish will go into the pens once those fish have been harvested. This is, something that we want to make sure that nobody wants to cull 3 million fish. We want to do this in an orderly way, in a fair way. It's going to be a difficult transition, so we want to make sure that we do it right. And we will see the majority of the fish will be out of the farms by April of 2021.
So if these fish farms are bad for wild salmon, why let them continue operations?
We're actually making this decision based on what we heard from First Nations communities. This was about making sure that the consultation process was followed. We had a process that we followed very closely to make sure that First Nations opinions and desires were taken into account as we made that decision. With regards to fish farms in BC and coastal waters, I have a mandate to transition fish farms by 2025. That is a bigger conversation. It's a lot more that has to be done in order to do that. The Discovery Islands is a unique case, a unique situation, and that's what we're dealing with today. This was a very difficult decision because, there are a number of people who will be impacted by this decision. This is going to impact our coastal communities. Aquaculture plays an important economic role in British Columbia, and we want to make sure we move forward with the industry in order to make sure that we have, be global leaders in sustainable aquaculture in the future.
So what will be done for the workers at these plants to transition to other work?
So right now, we're going to be in conversations with the industry over the next weeks and months to determine what the best path forward is. Of course, we want this transition to be fair, to be open. We're going to continue to have those conversations to see how we can best make sure that we're addressing concerns that we're hearing as we go forward with the removal. But as I said, this was not an easy decision. Because these are people whose livelihoods are working in those farms. So, but we also know that First Nations wanted those farms removed from that area, and that is what we are focusing on now.
And ultimately, how long will all of this take?
So the majority of the fish will be out of the area by April of 2021. We'll see close to 80% or up to 80% removed by that time. Some of the fish need a little bit longer to grow. Some will be removed in October of 2021, and then the rest will be removed in early 2022. This actually aligns well with the British Columbia plan to transition farms to make sure that First Nations are consulted by June of 2022. This aligns with their plans as well.
All right, Minister Jordan, thank you. That is DFO Minister Bernadette Jordan joining us from Nova Scotia.
Thanks so much for having me.
And with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans announcing they will not be renewing fish farm licenses in the Discovery Islands in BC, people who have wanted those farms shut down have reason to celebrate today. Joining us from our Vancouver Bureau is Bob Chamberlain, who has opposed fish farms for a long time. He joins us now. Bob, thanks for joining us. Hearing that after extensive consultations with 7 First Nations directly affected by the fish farm industry, How does it make you feel to hear this announcement?
I'm very grateful for the announcement today on the Discovery Island fish farms. It's a very significant and meaningful step to protect the wild salmon of British Columbia, which are very much on a downward spiral towards extinction.
So what do you think was the turning point for the Liberal government? Because for years DFO has defended the fish farming industry.
Well, I think the turning point is during the election campaign when now Prime Minister Trudeau made the commitment to transition to land-based closed containment. And then the strong unified voice from virtually every corner of the province in terms of safeguarding wild salmon, in particular the fish farm impacts. There were 102 First Nations that identified themselves to be supportive of this transition to remove the open net cage fish farms from the ocean. And I think that was a significant piece of the puzzle.
So is it too little too late? Will this be enough to save the wild salmon?
Well, gosh, I certainly hope not. I mean, many of us that have fought for a very long time for the appropriate protection of wild salmon in British Columbia would have rather have seen this decision made 10, 15 years ago. But it is what it is. And so today what we have is we're going to have a very critical out-migration route for the wild salmon of the 7 First Nations who were consulted, but also the Fraser River. And with the historic low returns over the past 2 years and knowing only 1 to 4% of juvenile salmon smolts return to spawn, there is a long road of recovery yet ahead.
All right, thanks, Bob. That's Bob Chamberlain joining us from our studio in Vancouver.
Hey, thank you very much.
Well, there's certainly a lot to think about with respect to the wild salmon stocks and the fish farms. We have to take one more break, but still to come.
These dance moves, the Wikwemikong Nursing Home is typically a place for rest and relaxation, but its future is in jeopardy.
You know, it's so important. If the Wikwemikong Nursing Home closes down, that would displace all those residents that are there.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This is Charlene Raven-Tolley's rendition of a dream catcher. She says if you drive by her place near the highway through Kitigan-Zibi in Quebec, you won't miss it. Thanks for letting us use your photo, Charlene. And please send us your photo of the day. Email it to share@aptn.ca. We'll do our best to get them on the air. And now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting in eastern Canada, 0 degrees and snow in St. John's and -2 in snow in Fredericton. -12 in Nain and -8 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -10 in sun in Quebec City and -3 in Gaspé. -5 in sun in Peterborough and -9 in sun in North Bay. -6 in Timmins and 0 degrees in Wawa. -2 in snow in God's Lake and -19 in snow in Churchill. -2 in snow in Winnipeg and 0 degrees in Brandon. -4 in sun in Swift Current and 0 degrees in snow in Yorkton. -21 in snow in Buffalo Narrows and -30 in Stony Rapids. In Western Canada, -26 in snow in High Level and -16 in Peace River. +3 in Calgary and +5 in Lethbridge. 5 degrees in Kamloops and +4 in Penticton. +3 in Smithers and -23 in Fort Nelson. -31 in Dawson and -23 in Rock River. -36 in Yellowknife and -26 in snow in Trout Lake. -34 in snow in Colville Lake and -35 in Fort McPherson. -39 in a mix of sun and cloud in Baker Lake and -33 in Chesterfield. -23 in Clyde River and -28 in Arctic Bay. A country singer with northern roots is running a letter-writing campaign to try to save a beloved Manitoulin institution. Crystal Shawanda is asking people to write to the Minister of Health to save the Wikwemikong Nursing Home. CTV's Ian Campbell has more.
Even with these dance moves, the Wikwemikong Nursing Home is typically a place for rest and relaxation, but its future is in jeopardy.
You know, it's so important for our elders to stay engaged with their loved ones. And it's, you know, and not everybody has cars. So if the Wikwemikong Nursing Home closes down, that would displace all those residents that are there.
After learning the nursing home wasn't approved in the latest round of provincial funding, Shawanda took to Facebook asking everyone to write the Minister of Health a letter. The issue is on the radar of the local MPP.
We're trying to getting a sense of what went wrong. If the application was a good one, a solid one, a sound one, then why weren't they granted with funding?
The Ministry of Long-Term Care says it's received a large amount of applications staff are still going through. And while the home hasn't been approved, it hasn't been rejected yet either. In the meantime, those at the home say they're grateful for the support from the community.
Like Crystal comes and sings there every year, you know, so it doesn't surprise me that she started. She says, I just can't sit there, you know, and not do anything. I got to do something.
But let's make sure that, you know, this home and other homes on Manitoulin Island are also prepared and have the funding that they need to meeting those standards.
Well, it's unclear how long that application will take. Wikwemikong has been left in limbo. There are still some hoping for a Christmas miracle.
They really are like family there. So it's so important that the nursing home, we need to keep our elders home on the island.
According to Wikwemikong officials, a feasibility study was done and they'd have to build something new to reach those compliance standards. It gives them only 3 years to raise the necessary funds. Ian Campbell, CTV News, Sudbury.
Now here's Todd Lamoran for a look ahead to tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
We take a closer look at the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. More specifically, the Liberal government's Bill C-15. If passed, proposes to make sure the laws of Canada are in line with UNDRIP's principles. Conservative critic Cathy McLeod says the bill lacks clarity and points to the recent lack of consensus over C-15 at the recent AFN Chiefs Assembly.
They did not give a motion to support this bill, so if the government is true to its words about free, prior, and informed consent, if they can't get the support of the chiefs at the AFN, then, I'm not sure that they're ready to move this bill forward.
Justice Minister David Lametti says there's still time to address the chiefs' concerns.
We're going to continue to consult where we can with not just national Indigenous groups, but regional Indigenous leadership groups as well as nations, in order to really hear the concerns.
There'll be more of those 2 interviews coming up on Nation to Nation in just a few minutes. See you then.
Well, that does it for this edition of APTN National News. But with Christmas just around the corner, we leave you with some visuals of Candy Cane Lane in Edmonton. Stay tuned for Nation to Nation with Todd Lamoran. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a great night.